You got to, yeah, yeah. Of course, we got all these hang downs, and I don't know what happened with them. They didn't work out that. Yeah. So, anyhow, we're going to be in Mark chapter 2 this morning. I know you're disappointed to not see Keith. Not near as disappointed as I am, I can tell you that. I guess our group finally trudged on to where they were going, to the Navajo Nation. I had some issues along the way. Have to talk to Helen Carter about that. She probably has a little update here and there.
Car issues?
I think car issues and just issues, you know.
Oh, it was a trying day for us.
That's what makes a road trip fun right there.
Not that fun.
Yeah, I broke down a time or two in my life, so I just try not to sweat it. And I also never been lost. Melissa always thought I was lost. I said, listen, I know where I'm in whatever state I'm in. I know where north is. Now, I may not know exactly on the map where I'm at, but I'm close enough to be able to find myself. Yeah, that's exactly right. We just take the scenic route. That's exactly right. Take the scenic route. So, well, yeah, you know, you're at least in the USA, right? You haven't crossed any borders or anything. So, all right, we're going to be in Mark chapter 2. Keith got, I didn't know if he got all the way through 13 and what, but he did a little bit. So, we're going to start in around 13. So, as we open up in Mark, it's the same scenario we've seen a couple times before. Crowds coming to Jesus. People in Galilee and the surrounding regions are coming to see Jesus. It's a big deal. So they're listening to his preaching. He's preaching about the kingdom. He's preaching about I don't know that he's preaching about God. He's preaching about the nation. He's healing folks and casting out demons and doing all those things. And now he's at the Sea of Galilee, and the crowds are come to him. And in verse 13, we see that Jesus was there to teach them. Verse 13, he went forth again to the seaside, and all the multitude resorted unto him, and he taught them. And that's what he was doing. He was teaching. So he had come to proclaim the gospel. And so Jesus is walking by the seaside, and he comes to the tax collector booth. He says, Levi, follow me. And he gets up immediately and follows him. It's the same thing happened with James and John and Simon and Andrew, the fishermen. They just dropped everything immediately and followed Jesus. And so we have to kind of, again, I learned a lot. I learned it from a different perspective, and I always enjoy that. So we're going to talk from possibly a different perspective than we ever thought about it. It's similar. You know, we don't like the tax guy. Nobody likes the tax guy, you know. We like the roads. We like the schools. We like, you know, all the stuff that we enjoy because of the taxes. We just don't like the tax part of the taxes, okay? And so Levi's sitting in the tax booth. He's a tax collector, okay? And this tax booth, the way I understand from this particular writer, was more like a toll booth, okay? It's more like, you know, they were bringing goods in and they had to pay a toll or a tax for maybe a tariff is what we would call it, from goods moving in and out. And so, because they were on the road in Galilee, which is a central place for trade coming in and out. So the toll might be on the fish caught at the Sea of Galilee, any kind of goods that are in transit. So Capernaum was a major town, and the travelers would pass through, going from there to there, and tax collectors in these toll booths were just not everyone's favorite person. They were despised. But they weren't despised like what we might think of the IRS, the tax collectors of the IRS. They had a bad reputation for dishonesty. The way they made their money is they charged over whatever the Roman government had set as far as what the tariff or the tax or the toll was going to be. And anything over that, that's how they made their living. And so you can see how greed and that kind of thing would come into play if you were so inclined. And they were also, they were working for the Romans. And so extortion, corruption, they were rampant. They could charge whatever they wanted. So it'd be like us going to, say, Tulsa and driving through the toll road, okay, and not having any idea what the toll would be until we got there. And the next toll, you wouldn't have any idea what it would be. Just whatever the toll guy we don't have the window anymore. They take a picture of your license plate, but like getting that thing in the mail, that you paid over the air, not knowing. You pull through the first guy and it's $5. Yeah, you pay your $5. You pull through the next guy and it's $55. You just don't know. And so that's kind of the extortion and kind of thing that was going on and the corruption. It was at the discretion of whoever was working the booth. And so that in and of itself I found interesting. But then there's a quote from the Mishnah, which the way I understand was the first written part of the Torah, which is the Jewish law thing. And so I found this very interesting. The Mishnah prohibited receiving alms from a tax collector, okay, because the money was presumed to have been gained illegally. Okay, so they wouldn't take money that they thought, was illegal. Okay, if a tax collector entered a house, everything in the house became unclean. Okay. The rabbis went as far as to say you could lie to the tax collector. Okay, the Jewish people were given permission to lie to the tax collector to protect their property. They were hated because they were dishonest. They were hated because they worked for the Roman government. And so now we find, Jesus called the fisherman, but now he's calling a tax collector, someone hated by all the Jewish people, and called him to be his follower. Okay. And this is what happens next, because Jesus goes to Levi's house. Okay, that's a whole nother deal. Okay, but he's eating with the tax collector, but he's not eating by himself, just him and Levi. Lots of tax collectors are there. Lots of sinners are there. Okay, so with Jesus and his disciples. Verse 15 says, "And it came to pass that as Jesus sat at meat in the house, many publicans and sinners sat also together with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many, and they followed him." Okay, so these were early followers, not necessarily disciples, but early followers that had, they were curious about what was going on. They were welcomed by this teacher, and they were among their peers, so they weren't chastised, as far as that goes. So why are there so many tax collectors and sinners? They were following Jesus. And so now we find the conflict, okay, because that caused an issue, which is interesting to me that there would be people, maybe not interesting, but it struck me that there were people watching, okay? The scribes and Pharisees didn't have nothing better to do except look at what Jesus was doing. Look at what his followers were doing. And so, because there was always, anytime we find an incident, there's always scribes and Pharisees or priests or somebody present. watching what's going on. And so all through chapter 2 and 3, there's going to be conflicts with the leaders and stuff. And so Jesus is eating with tax collectors and notorious sinners. And we're going to get to that. And this becomes a problem for the scribes. And listen, this is what they say. Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Okay. How did they know they were sinners? Okay. How did they label them? Obviously, the tax collectors, they knew who the tax collectors were. Okay. So these were notorious sinners. These were people with a reputation and not a good one in this area that they were in.
Well, they wouldn't be running around with tax collectors if they were.
And that's that goes back to how Jesus and his disciples' reputation was being questioned at that time. And so the tax collectors are just doing their job. They're not doing it well. They're doing it for nefarious reasons, and they were cheats and they were dishonest. But they're not just sinners. Like we look around the room and we know all have sinned. Okay, we know all have sinned. These were recognizable. And the only thing I could come up with that struck me when I first started reading this, and it's not necessarily sinners, but I've been watching documentaries on drug abuse. And there's this drug, and it's primarily up in the northeast and in Canada, and it's called trank, I think is what they call it, trank. And the people that are addicted to this trank are bent over. They're bent over. They walk around town like this, and they look up to get to where they're going, but they can't stand up. Okay, so you can look out on the street and know who's addicted to this particular drug. I mean, obviously you can see the guys going in circles and the fentanyl and all the altering drugs that make them act weird. But these are bent over. It's like they're going to work and they're just bent over. And so that's what came to my mind when these were known nefarious people, whether it was prostitutes or gangsters or it doesn't say, and I don't know, but what I think of when I can see something, it was nefarious. Maybe like the LA gangs that use the different colors, the Crips and the Bloods, and that you can see that they're a sinner, a nefarious person. Okay, so Jesus is eating with these people, and these are the people that are following Jesus, and so that's why the scribes are asking that question: what's your teacher doing? Why would he eat with these kinds of people? Okay, so now we know where the hearts of the scribes are, with these kinds of people. Now, you can't help it if people follow you. Whatever type of people may follow you, you can't really help that. Okay, if you own a business, you really can't help what kind of people come through the drive-thru or whatever. But he's eating in a tax collector's house. Okay, and that's just unheard of. He's eating with tax collectors and sinners. So what's he doing? Well, if we look at the arrogance of that particular statement, okay, the finger pointing and just the arrogance of the scribes, and we're just going to say scribes, only a person who doesn't think he's a sinner would ask that particular question. Think about it, okay? Only a person that doesn't think he's a sinner. So Jesus' response in 17 is, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. Okay? Now, when we hear that, there's two schools of thought on that, and we're just going to go into the one, but the two schools of thought on that, self-righteous, the scribes themselves, and righteous according to the law that was in place at the time, according to the old law, because we kind of we're in the middle of that, and so. But we're going to talk about the self-righteous, and so healthy people don't need a doctor, and that was a common proverb, and it's a common thought even today, and in the things we do. Jesus takes that proverb and he applies it to what he's teaching and applies it to his ministry. Jesus has not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Let's talk about what Jesus is saying from the aspect of sin. Sick are the ones in need of a doctor, obviously. Those who are well don't need a doctor. But let's look at it the perspective and not misunderstand from the perspective we spoke of what Christ is talking about. Jesus is not saying that some people are sick and some people are well, okay? Even though that's what, on the surface, that's what it sounds like. The message of the gospel, and we know this, everyone is sick, okay? Everyone is sick. Everyone is under condemnation. There's none righteous. You can find that in Romans 3. Jesus is not saying that some are good and some are not. Jesus is making something very clear. Who are the people who go to the doctor? The people who go to the doctor are those who know, emphasis on know, that they're sick. Okay? And men don't know they're sick. Men don't care if they're sick. And that's the problem with, as I was thinking about that and I was focusing on myself, men don't like to go to the doctor. The world, in its state, in its sick state, doesn't want to go to the doctor. You'll get well on your own, or if you don't know, it doesn't hurt you or whatever. It's just one of those kind of things. So, who are the people that go to the doctor? The ones that know they're sick. They admit that there's something wrong, and they realize they will not be made well without going to the doctor. They need help, and they know it. So this is the point. What do you want from a doctor? You want intervention. You don't go to the doctor for, talk about golf or whatever. You go because you're sick and you need treatment. But even though you know where to go and you don't go, the doctor can't help you, okay? If you don't go, doesn't mean that there's not a doctor, there's not help, there's not healing. It just means you're not taking advantage of what healing is there, okay? So, the doctor has no value if you don't recognize your sickness and then go for treatment, okay? There's no value to you, okay? So, Jesus says, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. And we just talked about that. Jesus is not, the call is not to the people who think they're saved. The call is to the people who are lost and know it. Okay? Just like the ones that think they're well don't go to the doctor, those that think they are spiritually well don't seek the spiritual doctor. Okay? You're not looking to change. Okay? If you think you're right, okay, and you're a man, I can't speak for women, but if you're a man, you don't want somebody telling you that you're wrong, okay? We don't like that, If we think we're right, we don't want somebody telling us we're wrong. We don't want somebody even suggesting that we might be in some way wrong about any particular piece of what we think is right about, okay? And when you get to a point where you realize you're wrong, okay, it's almost as tough to swallow that realization, but more so confess that you're wrong, okay? Admit that you're wrong. We don't like that, you know. We can just skip right over that part, you know. We're wrong, we know we're wrong, we're sorry we're wrong, but we're not going to admit that we're wrong, you know. We're not going to stand up and just be proud that we're wrong, okay? So if you look at the world in the spiritual state that it's in, they don't want to be told they're wrong, and they're not going to have any arrogance about the fact that they are wrong. Now, obviously, people do, but that's not what we're talking about. So, and I thought this spoke right to me, and I you know, how often do we pre-sort people? You know, we put them in different categories. You know, we'll categorize people, okay, into who we think will listen to the gospel, okay? Not only who we think that will listen to the gospel, who we think deserves the gospel. I mean, I think we do that. I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not saying I'm proud of it, but I think we do that. I think we try to get to decide who deserves the gift of the gospel, okay? Who deserves that healing, okay? And so we pre-sort people, you know. But usually the people we pre-sort are those that don't think they're sick, okay? You know, because our friends are generally moral people, or we wouldn't count them as friends unless they've obviously been friends forever. You know, our associates, even if they're not friends, we don't tend to hang out with people that live a contrary lifestyle than, you know, than what we do. And so we tend to pre-sort. We pick out the people that are morally good and try to share the gospel with them, okay? Share the healing. They don't receive it because they don't think they're sick. They don't see their sickness. We're afraid to take the gospel to the people that are, we'll call them notorious. We shy away from that, you know. Not everybody, but we tend, as just the members of the congregation, shy away from sharing the gospel with those that we call notorious, those that you can, I don't know if you could see, you know, but may be a nefarious person, whether it be by reputation or be by the way they look, or, you know, who they hang out with, or what they do for income, or anything like that. Jesus is declaring that the gospel is for sinners, just as they are. It's not to find people who are somewhat good and give them the gospel, because, and I thought this was I never thought of it this way, so listen closely. It's not transformation and then the gospel, okay? It's the gospel and then the transforming power of the Spirit. And so, you know, we just don't get good people wet and then, you know, they just go on with their life just like they were, you know. And so what Jesus is doing in Levi's house, eating with tax collectors and sinners, he doesn't just preach repentance. Jesus befriends sinners, okay? Eating with someone in this time was a very intimate thing. You just didn't just eat with everybody, you know. You had your group and your friends and your, you know, friend group and that kind of thing, and your peer group. The kingdom, if you think about it, the kingdom is for the outcasts, okay? Those that are separated from God are outcasts. So we were all, at some point in our lives, an outcast. Whether we were society's outcast or not is irrelevant, because that's what we look at. But we were all separated or outcast from God at some point in our life, and we can't forget that, okay? And so the kingdom is for outcasts. The kingdom is for the people that know they're spiritually sick, okay? But not only know they're spiritually sick, they're looking for a treatment. They're looking for a healing, okay? And so it's not for people who are pretending to be fine and don't need a doctor. And this was another interesting statement that was just kind of thrown in here. The kingdom is not contaminated by sinners, okay? The kingdom is not contaminated by sinners. The kingdom is for restoration and healing and reconciliation to God. The message of sin and grace and transformation is for the world, not for our friend group, not for people that look like us or talk like us or, act like us, okay? It's for the world. So we have this cure, that we have this treatment, and if you had a doctor that was whatever kind of doctor he might be, but he just stayed at the house or on the golf course, he wouldn't be much of a doctor, would he? He wouldn't be treating anybody. He wouldn't be helping anybody. He wouldn't be a doctor. He would have that letters and stuff after his name, but he wouldn't be a doctor, So the message is to be brought to the world. They can't help the sick if they hide. So self-admitting sinners are the ones who are in the kingdom. Okay? I can't, you got something to say, Brian, or are you just straightening your glasses? Because I can just barely see you back there.
Well, if you go to a doctor and it cures you of a cold, you might be a little thankful. But if you go to a doctor and it cures you of cancer, you're going to be really thankful.
Absolutely.
And that kind of applies here. Sometimes the most lost people make the strongest converts because they're thankful very much.
Right. That abundance has overwhelmed them. And so you can even look at the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Okay? This is what Jesus is teaching. We're reading about the refusal of the self-righteous to see themselves in need of forgiveness. Okay? That's what we're seeing. The refusal of the self-righteous to see that they're in need of forgiveness. Okay? And a lot of times we can find ourselves right in that same category. Okay? That's kind of the self-confessed sinners. That's what makes up the kingdom. That's what makes up the church. Because I can't tell Mark you're a sinner without Mark accepting that, realizing that, understanding that, and following the steps to get out of that. Okay? I bring this up a lot, and I don't know why, because
I always looked at this as a preemptive strike by Jesus. He knew that the gospel was going to be given to all the world and not just to the Jews.
right.
So this is one of his first steps to show that.
Yeah, because they're not accepting the forgiveness from the one that they they can't really see, but that actually has the authority to grant it. Okay? They're looking from the outside in, and they don't see the scandal of the gospel that we kind of struggle with is forgiveness is not based on how good you are. Okay? Forgiveness is based on how much you understand who you are in God's sight. Okay? And when we realize how one of the songs we sing talks about how wretched, and we don't use that word much, but how wretched we are in the sight of God without Christ. Without that saving blood of Christ, how wretched, how set apart, how filthy we are because of the sin that separates us from God. And so forgiveness is not based on how good you are, but how you understand how you gather an understanding, garner an understanding, how much you understand of who you are. And Paul talks about it,
I think this is so important because so many people say, I'm beyond redemption.
Absolutely.
And they just have the wrong idea of it. And I think sometimes it labors me, for sure. I got to thinking, man, I'm just not living up to what I should be.
Right, absolutely. And it's a process. I mean, because I don't know if anybody's ever been to an AA meeting. The first step, you got all these step programs and stuff like that. The first step, admit you have a problem. Okay? You have to admit that you have a problem. You have to see that you're not righteous. You have to see that there's sin in your life. You have to see that you're wretched. You're separated from God. Until you see that, the rest is irrelevant. It can't matter because you have to decide you're a sinner. You have to decide you're separated from God. You have to decide that there's something you need to do to rectify that particular situation. Nobody can decide that for you. Okay?
Just like in AA, at least they can see a light to the end.
Absolutely. Okay? And what you were alluding to a while ago, this is what Paul said. This saying is trustworthy and deserving of full acceptance that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the foremost. Okay? Paul saw his separation, and he understood that it was Paul that was separating him and nothing else. And so, who did Jesus come to save? Sinners. He didn't come to save the righteous. So people have to think about this. Jesus did not come to save the righteous, but the sinners. So if we think we're doing fine spiritually, that might be a self-righteous situation that you might be in. Okay? If we don't see our need, and this is how we fulfill our need. Okay, this is our weekly dialysis or whatever. This is something that we have to do in order to maintain our health, our healthy relationship with God. Okay, and so if you if you happen to be on dialysis and you decide you're fine and don't go, it's not going to end well. Okay? So if you think you're spiritually full and don't need this, okay, it's not going to end well. Because Jesus doesn't call the people who think they're doing well. Jesus calls the people who will not lift their head to the sky, but simply say, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And that's easy to forget. You're not forgiven because of how good you are. You're forgiven because you realize how terrible you are. So why did Jesus call Levi? And why are tax collectors and sinners following Jesus? And why is he befriending tax collectors and sinners? Why is he eating with tax collectors and sinners? Because Jesus came to save sinners. The righteous think they can heal themselves. The righteous think they're healthy. The righteous think they're doing good. They think they can make themselves right before God. Sinners know how utterly sinful they are. They bow their knee to Jesus, knowing that there's nothing we have to offer except our humble sorrow and complete brokenness. And it's these folks that Jesus forgives. It's us that Jesus forgives. Okay? And this was difficult for me. Is there one person you don't want to come to church? Is there one person you can think of that you don't want to come to church? You'll be embarrassed because they're here. You don't like the way they look. You don't like their reputation in town. You don't like the way they smell or where they live or what they do. Those are the people that Jesus focused on, okay? Those are the people that Jesus loved and sat down to meet with, to eat, and to share and to save.
I think Jesus was teaching a different salvation than the Jews.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Pharisees and Sadducees and priests are like, bring your sacrifices to us.
Yeah,
We'll sacrifice them.
yeah,
Go back to your old job if you're a tax collector, because that's a sin.
right,
Jesus didn't tell them not to go back to their old job. He told them not to take what was more than.
right. That's exactly right. So,
And he also offered them the sacrifice for them.
right, and the solution. He offered the medicine that they needed
These people weren't even
to be well.
welcome.
No, they didn't care, and we have to think, and that's kind of what we're talking about. Think of those people that we don't want here. You know, the homeless guy on the side of the road, or just whoever. That kind of puts us in the same thinking as the scribes. You know, they looked down on those folks. They weren't worthy of and we're going to say the gospel. Okay, and that's when we become self-righteous. Okay. We ask, what's this person? I'll say, guy, what's this guy doing here or whatever? And that's happened here. I know it's happened here, okay? And there have been instances where, it's a difficult situation to be in, especially if the person doesn't know they're here, okay? That makes it difficult for the congregation. And there's been those instances here at Farmington also. And so when you're broken by your sin and you don't think you can do it and you can't be good enough, kind of like what Rick was talking about, or be what the gospel has called you to be, that's exactly where Jesus wants you to be, okay? That's exactly when you look to the doctor for help, when you realize you're sick, when you know you need help, okay? We want to be humble so that we seek the mercy and grace of Jesus. The law wasn't given so you could check those boxes and make sure you're good enough. Average, the mean average, I can, I'll make it, no problem. Okay? The law came so that you could plead and make your appeal for mercy from God. Okay? If you're trying to be good enough, good doesn't have anything to do with it at all, okay? We need to recognize our sin. We need to recognize our separation from God. We need to recognize that it's times like this that we come together to encourage each other in God, towards His healing and His righteousness, and not pursuing a path that leads the opposite direction of salvation, okay? that's a difficult thing in this time, the world we live in. You know, and we've seen it happen here. You know, someone obeys the gospel, and I don't know what happens, but you never see them again. Okay, because I don't know if they get the mindset that that's all there was. Okay, they went to the dialysis that one time, and now they're fixed. You know, and it doesn't work that way. We need to stop pursuing a path that leads away from salvation, recognize our sin, recognize God's grace, recognize that we've been forgiven and what a gift that is, and be willing to share that with everyone. And love our neighbors as ourselves. You know, it's just. Some people don't find that a difficult concept. I find that a very difficult concept. I don't know if it's just because that's the world we've grown up in, the separation, you know, and it starts way back with the slavery that separated the nation, or the separating the Native American people to a different spot. You know, just that kind of thing. We like to hang out with the people that we like, and we don't like to hang out with the people that we don't like. And that hinders us from the Great Commission. That hinders us from doing God's will. That hinders us in our path towards our focus on God and His righteousness. And so we need to be aware of that. So next week we'll be in, we'll start in verse 18, I think. Yeah, verse 18. And try to get through part of chapter 3 maybe. Yeah, probably not. Probably not. Thank you for your attention and your comments, and I really appreciate it. And I don't know. I just run out of material, and it was 16 after, and I thought, well, it's time to shut this thing down.